Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 10th edition of the Gateway API Sync. As usual, a reminder that this community meeting, is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which boils down effectively to be nice to one another. So please do be nice to one another. Please try to use the raise your hand option in Zoom when you have a question or you want to interject, and we'll try to prioritize accordingly. We have a little bit on the agenda today. I wouldn't say it's a lot. We have some triage to fill in the time if we need to, and people who don't want to do triage can kind of fall off at that point if they like. If you do have anything you'd like to add to the agenda, it's an open agenda. Feel free to put it above the triage, and if we can get to it today, we will. If not, we can roll it over to the next meeting. Also, we like if people can put their attendee account on there. It helps us. We go back and we look how many people show up and stuff like that at certain times.
Shane, I think you probably intend to be sharing your screen, but you're not right now.
Oh, I can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All right, so go ahead and we'll get started with talking about the V080 release and milestone. Go ahead, Rob.
Cool. Yeah, just a few quick notes on 080. I know we'd been trying to finish this out and transition into API review early July. So what that means at this point is that we're trying to say that anything that merges by the end of the week is fair game and will be covered by API review, but we are trying to start the API review process and release candidate process next week. We have some thoughts about what gaps may or may not make it in. There's a lot of things right on the edge right now. One in particular that feels awfully close is the timeouts one on HV route. But we've gotten into quite the rabbit hole in terms of formatting, which I'll discuss later, but that may end up missing this milestone. But again, I think that the main goal here is we're trying to get everything that we can in this week. There's really not much left on the milestone itself that we're considering blocking, and what is left is just docs, which is not subject to API review, so we can get that process started independently. So yeah, that's just a heads up on where we are. We are trying to get 080 out as soon as we can. But if you have something you're trying to get into this release, please make sure it's in and merged by the end of this week.
Roger that. No hands up. So if there are no questions, we'll go on to, we already talked about it. So that's the HTTP timeout one. That might make it to V1. Candace is next with GEP 1897. Go ahead, Candace. Is Candace in?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Right, so I think I wrote this down a while ago, and yes, we skipped the July 4th, so it's feeling like I haven't looked at this for a bit. So there's a couple of questions still outstanding in this enhancement proposal, which I wanted to know which ones would block the gap, or if people haven't had a chance to take a look at it yet, I'd like to reintroduce this.
Roger that. So this comment, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I think you had two specific questions here. One about the port targeting, and I feel pretty strongly that we don't want to have it in the policy. I think you could potentially get something through that just didn't allow targeting port at all, but that feels a little funny. I don't have as strong. My strongest opinion is that port shouldn't be in spec. Well, it shouldn't be in the actual body of the policy itself. It should be part of target ref or something like that, because it's really a way to target a specific section of a resource. With that said, I haven't thought as much about if it makes sense to just target an entire service regardless of port. It might, in which case maybe we can add port at a later point. I don't know if anyone else has an opinion on that, or Candace, if you have an opinion on that.
I added a new issue to discuss it, and was kind of hoping that it wouldn't block the gap, because
And
there's
just to clarify, when you say what wouldn't block the gap, do you want port to be in the gap at all, or are you just saying you would rather push forward without port in this initial version?
without port.
Okay. John, I think you've got a hand.
Yeah, it was just kind of a general comment. Like, I know we've had a lot of struggles with the scope of this and what it should be. But I want to make sure that if we're going to have a small scope, we explicitly acknowledge what that means, because we've talked about things like, oh, we can just add MTLS later. Like, from my understanding, this is a dead end. Like, we'll never add MTLS to this API. It's not fit for MTLS. So I want to make sure that we're not glossing over things and saying we can't think about all the scope of future things, and make sure that we are thinking about them and maybe putting them out of scope, but not kind of forgetting that. And, you know, a year down the line, we start thinking about MTLS and realize, oh, we made a huge mistake in this gap. So I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misunderstanding how this can support MTLS ever. So I'd like either some clarity on how that could happen, or explicit acknowledgement that something like that is not going to work, basically, is my point.
Maybe, I mean, that's a good point. Maybe just for a quick thought experiment here. What I think we're talking about when we talk about MTLS is kind of a client cert that the gateway would use to communicate with the backend as like one piece of configuration that we would want to add somewhere in Gateway API, potentially this policy. Is that what you're thinking as well, John?
Yeah.
And so, okay. And so in that case, these are both things that the gateway is doing to communicate with the backend, right? Like, one part is it's validating the cert that's served by the backend, and two, it's configuration for what cert it should use when communicating to that backend, which feels similar enough that it could potentially live in the same resource, right?
Well, no, the issue is that one is a server side config and one's a client config. So we can't have those be one resource, right? Like, a server can't tell me what my password should be when I connect to it. That doesn't make sense. It can say, here's the properties of the server, and the server goes configures them, and tell clients, you should use a password, you should use TLS, or, you know, use a certificate, but it can't tell it what certificate to use, right? That doesn't really work.
Yeah. Okay, no, that makes sense. So
and why do you want to solve? So right now, MTLS isn't supported in Gateway API, anyways, right? Or it's not defined or specified at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's been widely discussed as a use case. It's very common to use MTLS. Like, I'm fine with us saying that we're going to have a scope. What I don't want is for us to say we're starting small and expanding later, and then realizing that we can't actually expand, right? Like,
I'm a little confused. I don't even know if I have anything else to say other than I'm a little confused. So I get the general idea, but the it might be the language more so than the intention that's kind of confusing me right now. The currently this thing is talking about how to do TLS to a backend. It does not talk about how to do mutual TLS to that backend. You're worried that we might be in a situation where if we don't specify that or acknowledge that we're never going to do that now, we won't be able to do it later.
Yeah, my main point is that I am fairly certain that at some point we will want to support MTLS in Gateway API. I'm also fairly confident that this API cannot be made or modified to do so.
Cannot be grown to do it.
Yes, it cannot be grown to do so. So I want to be sure that, and maybe that's fine. Like it, obviously not every API has to solve every use case, but I want to make sure that we're clear on what is out of scope, but room for growth in the future versus out of scope and can never really be in scope, right? Like we
Can you
don't
dig
support
more
a,
into why you see a roadblock?
yes, this is fundamentally a server side configuration, right? It's attached to a service. MTLS is
Roger that.
fundamentally, well, it's two parts. It's mutual, so it's server and client, right? This is actually exactly why it was removed from the backend. I forget what it's called. Whatever the first API we had with backend in the name was this tension of like client and server configs configured in the same API. I believe that's one of the main reasons we removed it.
So that I took that to mean that we've already decided that we're going to handle these two different parts of the connection separately. So we're going to handle the connection to this from the gateway to the server separately. Then we're going to handle the connection from the client to the gateway, and that's a given.
I think what John is
I'm not talking about the
is
client to the gateway. I'm talking
the
about the
gateway
client.
is the client.
Yeah.
So do we have a position on this? Because I think it's very important. And I also put a comment in the chat about what is the definition of MTLS? Because I feel like there's a couple different models. And this one addresses one of the models of ownership in some ways, but not the other ones.
Can we back up to where John was talking about more about what he's looking for in this, that or the reason why
I think
he thinks
implicit
this
in
isn't.
this, as I understand it, and John correct me, this has been a longstanding thing where if you put it under the control of the service provider, then it precludes the gateway owner from making their own choices about what cert to use and what they accept.
But this is only a problem for MTLS?
I mean, it is especially relevant for MTLS because it's mutual, right? The control is split between the two sides.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think we were pretty clear from the beginning about the scope of this proposal. And I'm not sure why it remains kind of open, or that we would still be wanting to address MTLS within this proposal.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing from John is like we should just explicitly say this will not address the MTLS use case,
Yeah,
which is, I think, okay.
I think I'm still a little fuzzy on the restrictions to growth. I kind of get it, but I think end of the day, just acknowledging in here somewhere that MTLS is not in scope sounds like what John's asking for as a potential outcome. And then
Yeah.
And I guess
MTLS would
the
be handled
follow-up to that is
differently
we still have to
another
do
day.
something to support MTLS.
Some point in the future.
So I think two people were talking at once.
My bad.
Yes, sorry, there's a delay.
Oh,
So I guess, sorry, Shane, I think I spoke over you, but my general take on it is that if we go this direction, it's okay that we leave it out of scope, but then we also need to basically say that it needs to be defined, but it will be a different API resource for MTLS, right? Like that's the natural consequence of that.
yeah. I already mentioned, since this is called TLS connection policy, I already mentioned something could be done along the lines of MTLS connection policy. I don't know if that was just so terrible that nobody made a comment on it, but or that nobody saw that. That, or maybe John didn't see that.
I may have seen it, but I also don't like. I'm worried we're going to end up with like so many different APIs. Like, I get the appeal of a narrow scoped API because it's impossible to make forward progress otherwise. But you know, we don't want to end up with 500 different APIs for every little narrow use case, most likely.
Do we want so that, okay, is the only majorly contentious thing, sorry, I'm putting on my, let's see if we can kind of scope things down in terms of just this PR kind of hat. Is the only majorly contentious thing here MTLS, and everything else is something that we can live with going forward as a provisional gap, as long as we don't go out of provisional until we have solved the MTLS thing? Or are there other major things we need to resolve within this gap, this PR? Because if it's just that, I would suggest let's try to move forward with everything else that's in here. Put a big to-do at the top of this gap that says we do not move out of provisional until we have we resolve an MTLS in one of these two ways, and then make that its own scope. All we do in a PR, like just one PR just about MTLS before we move it out of provisional. That way there's nothing else getting caught up in the PR.
I also have some concerns on this subject, alternative name stuff.
Okay.
I don't see why we would block it for MTLS.
Not block it for MTLS, but make sure, because I think the general idea here is that if we can't resolve MTLS because this doesn't doesn't set up a growth path for it, do we end up causing ourselves a lot of additional maintenance in the API over time when we eventually do need MTLS? And those are concerns we always have to be thinking about with this API. We have to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a corner because there's this is such a high a high traffic API and stuff like that. And it would be, if we didn't think a little bit ahead in terms of like where we can actually path to, we would end up with so many different APIs, so many different attributes for so many things, and it would be a maintenance nightmare. And the API would be hard to use for users. Like, users would get to a point where it's like, there's so many freaking options, and we have to balance that because there are already so many freaking options. So it's like,
Yeah,
it's a hard line to walk.
To be honest, I think separating this out from all the other pieces of the API, the way that I have been forced to, is kind of a, a symptom of that. This is already like picking it apart in a way that I don't think we need to, but I went that way, to play along with what's going on, and in the hopes that, it's okay for us to pick it apart in this way. So now what we're talking about is, no, we don't want to pick it apart anymore. We want to go back to like kind of combining things together. So it feels sort of futile to continue this, to be honest.
I'm sorry that you feel that way about it. I really am. Unfortunately, we have to include everyone's equity in this because everyone's got to use this API, and like everyone's invested a lot in this API. So we can't ignore the equity of some stakeholders for simplicity. Some things do get stretched out. However, I don't think we're saying that MTLS has to make it in this gap, just that we have to, because we have to respect everyone's equity in the process. And we have to look at things like, are we going to be able to path from here to a future with a nice, clean MTLS implementation, or is it going to cause problems to do that? We have to kind of stop and do that exercise now, unfortunately. Go ahead, Bowie.
Yeah, but I think like why we have these discussions is because there's fundamentally a several different usage models that we are trying to capture, and unfortunately they are somewhat in conflict, right? Like there's one where we're saying, hey, the person creating the service is also going to determine these things. And then there's another usage model where it says, actually, no, someone else, like the gateway owner, should be determining it. It's okay. Those are two different use cases and they are in conflict with each other. Now we could make a decision as to, like, as a community, we only think one side of it and that's sufficient, but it sounds like in this case we actually need both. It would be good to hear other folks' opinion on this, because I think if we separate these two things, because they are essentially in conflict with each other, there's like no way to sort of like merge them into the single API. It might be okay, it's a bit more complicated, but that's kind of how the world is being represented.
Right. So maybe it's as simple as that. And we just need to document it. And then the other thing here, it looks like we are kind of running really high on time for this one issue, so we will have to kind of wrap it up. But I think I'd like to see us just do some kind of follow-up where we say either we do resolve the MTLS thing and document it, / whatever we want to end up doing with that. Just make sure that everybody's concerns are kind of captured in the doc. And then this one, it looks like John, that you might need to check back in on the subject alternative name one, because there's kind
Yeah,
of
sorry, I missed
questions here.
that. I was waiting on a comment. I commented, you probably just have to refresh, but basically I don't think we can skip this. This is a hard requirement for TLS in my mind. Without this, we're effectively doing the insecure skip verify mode of curl or go or whatever.
That makes sense to me.
Doesn't seem acceptable.
Okay, thank you. All right. So two more major things to follow up on in here. The resolution does not have to be the implementation of MTLS is added. It just needs to be acknowledged. What we thought through a little bit and acknowledged what we're going to end up needing to do. And then the SAN one needs to have the same treatment, some kind of continued pursuit of it. So we can follow up in the PR. Does anybody else have any more hands to raise for this one, or should we move on?
I'd just like to comment that I won't be able to work on the MTLS stuff. That's not my area. I don't know. I don't really know what the concerns are. So I think we need to split that off from this somehow.
Is anybody opposed to my suggestion that we could do that by adding, we've done this with other GAPs, where we add a to-do list at the item at the top that says somebody needs to check in on this MTLS thing before we move past provisional? Is that an acceptable way to do that?
I think that makes sense. In upstream, usually what it is, it's an unresolved block, in that case a CAP, but I think that's what we want here. I know this has been a really long running PR and we do want to make some progress, and there's a lot that there is consensus on here. But certainly the path forward to MTLS, even though we don't need to have everything, I think we need to at least understand that there is a path that makes sense and we're not boxing ourselves in. And to further clarify, I'm not saying it needs to be within the same API. I just don't want to have 10 different APIs related to TLS.
Sorry, I was probably not muted and you probably heard all of that clickety clack. All right. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I actually got that out there. So I think we can get focus on the SAN thing, get this merged, and then we can't move out of provisional until we just hyper focus in on the MTLS bits, which I understand that you're not particularly interested in that one. We'll kind of have to follow up on that one, Candace. But I just want to say that I appreciate all the effort that you put in so far, and I appreciate the effort of everyone who's been reviewing and helping to try to make sure that we come up with something that everybody can use. So thank you all. All right, onward and forward. Rob, GEP 1742.
Sure. Okay, so this one has become quite the rabbit hole itself. As it turns out, so this is really just an addendum to the GEP related to timeouts, which is GEP 1742. This was initially proposed as using meta v1 duration. I think it was Tim and maybe some others called out that that's not really been used in a Kubernetes API before, at least a official Kubernetes API. And there's significant discomfort with the idea of relying on Go duration parsing for a Kubernetes API. So we've been trying to figure out, well, what could we possibly do here? The simplest option is just to use an int that represents milliseconds. That gets really annoying when you're trying to represent a longer timeout that would be measured in hours, minutes, or seconds. The other option would be to use a string and then have a very, very small set of values that we support, such as minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. So it looks awfully similar to Go duration, but it's a very small subset of that. I had thought and hoped that that would work very similarly to the XML spec, just because of how CRDs were handled very nicely with meta v1 duration using that parsing. But as it turns out, the actual XML spec has some variations that Tim has highlighted below, unfortunately. And so this is more of an update just to say we're maybe back to the drawing board on this one, and APIs are fun. Ideas welcome. Unfortunately, we're just, trying something that just hasn't been done very much in Kubernetes, well, at all in Kubernetes APIs. I know there's some prior art in other implementations as far as CRDs. So it's useful to get some feedback there as well. But if anyone has ideas, very welcome on this one.
Yep, if you've got experience with this, please do join in on 2155. Doesn't seem like we have any raised hands or anything, so just a call out, please do join in the conversation if you have some stuff to add there. All right, what time is it? 6:33. Okay. Oh yeah.
Sorry,
Just wanted to talk.
Sorry, we can't have floating point.
Yeah, and that is, I guess, option 3 in that we could do floating point, but
That was my thought.
that has its own problems, and it's right in
It
API
does.
conventions to avoid floating point, at all costs. So we'd be breaking a different API convention if we did that.
Well, if we exhaust all costs, if we get through everything and that's what remains, we Sherlock
Yeah,
Holmes
is it disallowed, or is it you shouldn't do? How strong is that?
I'll have to double check. It's at least you shouldn't, but it may be more.
Let's just go change that doc.
We have
Well, I know that
changed
there are
API
some
conventions
issues.
before, so
There are some
anything's
issues with
possible.
round tripability on floating point, but does it apply here? That kind of stuff.
There's some chat going on I was missing. Oh, I don't know if it's relevant to this.
Oh, we're on TLS still. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I just want to make sure we're missing something. So yeah, okay. So floating point was my thought. I was like, have to play that one out too. This is going to take a little while, Rob.
Yeah, I think that's it. I really timeout. This gap was very close to making it into 080. And it's annoying that it's getting held up on what feels like a technicality, but it is an important one. And it's hard to walk back from something if you don't get it right the first time. I did in the Zoom chat add a link to the API conventions and the guidance given. And as Bowie kind of alluded to, the concern is round tripping. You can lose, you can't reliably round trip them, and you can lose precision in the process. Yeah,
makes you feel any better for me to say this out loud, although I know you know it, but like this is one of those classic things that like in computer science it's always a pain, but doesn't feel like it should be. Time.
Yeah,
it's always a pain.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, please do join in. Anybody who has any thoughts on that and any experience, especially, we'd love to hear some people's experiences. Road to GA. So I did put a post out. Some of you might have missed it on Monday before the 4th of July. I wasn't really going to be in, but I was, and just kind of went through the board and stuff like that on my own, pruned a couple of things, and kind of made a post about like some of the things that are in the road to GA. So I thought we'd look at it real quick today. Rob and I, before this meeting, actually just went Nick's out for a couple of weeks. So we just kind of have been doing a series of over the last few months of like continuing to prune this, continuing to clean and try to get it in good shape. And at this point, we're down to 10 things that are ready to be picked up, 21 things in progress, although I think Rob and I are going to kind of go through these because some of these may not be accurately described as in progress, but overall, 10 things that need to be done, then 4 cleanup things that are kind of administrative once these things are done to get to GA. So I just wanted to kind of point that out to everybody. If you haven't seen the board before, it's not, you can use it if you want. It's kind of been just for us to kind of do backlog grooming. But it is an accurate representation of what it's going to take left to right to get to GA. And we're looking pretty good. We have a few months. We're in a open source community, so we don't have like dedicated for sure engineering hours. So there's always some risk. If there's anything that you can pick up, anything that you even have an inkling that you'd like to pick up, please do. And please do reach out to us and ask for help. Like if you're like, I kind of want to work on this, but I just don't even know where to start, ask us where to start. We'll be happy to have a sync with you on Slack or something like that and kind of help you along the way. And we appreciate the help. So that's all. I just wanted to kind of point out where we're at for people. And if you have any questions or anything, let us know. But move right along. I don't see any hands, so go ahead, Gaurav.
Hi everyone. So this is more along the lines of an informational update. I believe we have been having this discussions regarding how we can improve the observability of policy attachment. One of the options mentioned there was like to develop some kind of a plugin or a binary or a library so that you can kind of see which our policies are attached to your gateway resources. So I've tried to come up with some kind of a minimal POC which tries to do or achieve that. It's still in a very nascent stage and there's lots of things to be done, but I just wanted to call this out that I'm working on something similar to this. And yeah, if we have some time, maybe I'd like to share my screen and show you what all we can support right now, or if you feel like.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
I think so. Let me double check actually.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we have like one more item. We should be good. I will have to make you co-host, I think, for it to work.
Or if it's too much of a problem, I think I have some examples in the repo itself which show like what.
No, not at all. Here you go. You are co-host and you should be able to share.
Awesome. Give me a moment. Okay, I hope you all can see my terminal at this point. So for example,
Yes.
One of the things is like finding out which all policies are available to you. So you can do it through gateway cuddle, get policies, and this should list like all the policies that are attached to various resources. For example, I have a health check policy which is attached to this particular gateway. So this kind of tries to solve that problem that you don't know which all policies are affecting your resources. We can also do something like fetch all policy CRDs, which will show you which all policies are available to you to create resources for. For example, right now we just have like, these are some dummy policies that I created to test this out. You could do stuff like, some of this is like inheriting things from kubectl. For example, you can list HTTP routes, but how it shines is that you could do something like describe HTTP routes, and this will then show you a detailed view of what your HTTP routes are, along with any policies which may be affecting you. There could be direct policies which are attached to your HTTP routes directly, or it will also show you like if it's being affected by any inherited policies, for example, from your gateway or your gateway class. Or yeah, right now there isn't support for namespaces, but I will add it soon. So I thought I'll call this out, that if anyone has any brilliant ideas regarding how we can improve this, or any concerns or stuff like that, please do reach out to me on Slack or through the issues. Yeah, I think I'll stop sharing my screen now. Yeah, that's it for me.
Cool. Thank you for putting that together. That's pretty cool, Rob.
Sure.
The
Yeah,
link
awesome
to the
to see.
repository is right there in the docs. If anybody.
Awesome to see a live demo go perfectly. So well done. That's yeah,
Play the
it's
lottery
really
today.
great. Yeah. Really great to see this. I think this is something that we're interested in making a, Kubernetes SIGs project, or maybe integrating directly in Gateway API at some point, but it's great to see this just, working already. I don't know, you still have more you want to do, but really great demo. And I think this is going to make the policy UX a lot more manageable and easier for people to wrap their heads around. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, so what's the next step? Do we host it somewhere? Like, because if it's like a personal repo, right, it's going to be hard for people to contribute.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought that was, he just started there.
Yeah, I just started there because I only had access to that particular repo. But if the community feels that it needs to be hosted in a more central location, then definitely we can definitely do that. But I guess it needs to be discussed. Like,
if you wanted to get migrated to Kubernetes 6, just don't GPL2 license it. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, I talked a bit with Shane about this as well, and we, the big question is if this becomes something like Ingress to Gateway, a separate project, or if we integrate it directly in Gateway API, the repo itself. I think there's good arguments either way. If someone has an opinion on that, definitely let us know. But I think we do want this to become community owned. It's just where. So if anyone has a strong opinion, let us know.
Thank you. And next, Dave, the Gateway Routability PRs. You're going to be out on Thursday, so want the feedback sooner rather than later. I did just CC myself on this. It's like 7 o'clock my time, so I won't do it tonight. But
just one, it may just be me, Shane, but for some reason I can't see your screen. But if it's just me, let me know.
It says I'm sharing it.
No, it doesn't work for me either. Yeah, I didn't see it in the triage, but I do see it in the milestones. That's why I was surfaced it. And then, yeah,
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we did drop, it's dropped in V080 with the expectation it would probably be merged this week. We'll see. But yeah, I get I appreciate you making the extra call out that you won't be, oh, actually, I read that wrong the first time. You'll be gone Thursday morning. You'll be gone Wednesday night. So next couple of days. Okay.
Yeah, if you can do reviews, like if you're in the West Coast tonight and then East Coast or other time zones tomorrow, then I can probably do something Tuesday night.
Roger that.
Address it and then do the rebasing, et cetera. So
okay. I will definitely check this one out in the morning. I'll prioritize that. All right, don't see any hands raised on that one. Just a call out for review. We can move on to triage. I did notice we have a pretty big turnout today. It's like 25. It's pretty decent. I think in the future, I should remember to ask people if they're like ask for, I think there's probably some newcomers. We should probably like do the thing where like people talk about what they're doing. Please do come to the next one. We'll try to remember to do that more often. We love to hear from people, especially people who are just joining and stuff like that, like what your use cases are and stuff like that. It's really great to see such a big turnout. But I think, given 15 minutes, we'll go ahead and try to do some triage. Anybody who wants to drop off, don't feel bad about it. Thank you for coming. Otherwise, we'll jump right into it. The first one, Rob and I talked about this briefly beforehand, is TLS config mode is optional but has no default.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think this one is an unfortunate bug almost. I think we can get away with making a field that had no default have a default if it's a no one value, I think. But this is someone who we just need to go through API machinery, maybe try it and then see if it gets caught in API review. But we should try round tripping and seeing if it works with the API conventions that and backwards compatibility guarantees that we already have. But it does sound like there are some that are already treating terminate as the default, which seems like a very reasonable interpretation.
This note here says neither Envoy Gateway nor Service
Oh,
Manager
I got that
handle terminate
wrong.
as the default. Yeah.
Huh.
Suffice to say, we should probably have a default. We don't. Terminate might not be the right default. So this one has to be teased out a little bit. And I think ideally this, it's not even ideal.
I mean,
I think we need to probably sort this out before Gateway TLS config, right?
Yeah, if you're going to specify certificate ref, it feels awfully strange to have it for any reason other than terminate. So I don't know. Maybe someone from an implementation that's handling this today. Is anyone handling the empty state today with any behavior or just invalid?
Yeah, we treat it as terminate.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah, so as long as I think as long as we can do that in a backwards compatible way that people are okay with, then we should just make it a default.
I may be missing something, but I feel like it says default in the spec. It says cube builder default equals terminate.
Huh, that's fun. I haven't looked at.
Is
Yeah,
it,
well-
does that get stripped from our public docs maybe and it's in the code only or something? Or maybe something weird's going on?
Maybe. Huh.
It's on line 305 if you want to get to it quickly.
Yeah, on gateway types.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's real funny. Okay. That, I mean, everything looks like it should be defaulting. Maybe we just need to, maybe this is a non-issue. Okay, cool. Why don't you assign that one to me and I'll clean it up if it's a non-issue. Unless anyone else is welcome to. I definitely don't need to take this.
You already said it, Rob.
I know.
You win. All right, thank you. All right, Rob will take a look at that one. So next up on the list, we have gateway class status supported features, which I've actually been working on with Lior. I don't know if I think it's late for him. I don't think he's in here.
Yeah, he's in EU, so he can't make this one, but this is more just a informational. There's a gap that exists for this. This is something like we've talked about for a while. Lior has started work on it. There's been some reviews already. But if you care about this feature, especially if you have an implementation that is populating supported features, this is very relevant to you. So really could benefit from reviews of implementers and people who've been working with conformance tests already, because there's a lot of overlap here.
Yes, indeed. SPR 2163, if you don't mind taking a look. Supported features and gateway class status. I'd guess the summary is effectively any controller, if you will, that picks up and acknowledges a gateway class would then say in the status what features it supports for HTTP route and so forth. That's like extended features. So in case that wasn't clear, I just want to make sure I clarified it, but maybe that was redundant. Okay, clarify the usage of path prefix rewrite. This merged. I merged this.
Oh, way to be ahead of
Or,
things.
I reviewed
Great,
this while I
okay.
was working down dinner before this meeting. So we're good on that one. Regex-based path rewrites from Arco. All right, what would you like to see added? Track support for regex-based path substitution mentioned in the GEP 726. Arco, are you in here?
Yeah, I don't see him, but I would just say that this is something that GK would be interested in, and I think obviously others as well.
Are you suggesting like we do it as like a nice to have, try to see if we can get it in?
No, I'm not really talking about timeline just as much as, you know, right now we're just collecting interest and ideas, I would say. But if you are interested in this, maybe add a thumbs up or something like that.
Be interesting to add that. I think given that you and Arco are both interested in it, and it makes sense to me, we should probably just mark this as triage accepted, but say it's not going to be something we need to do for V1.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I still have to do that, which stinks. And then we don't need it on the board. Okay, cool. Next one. Session persistence gap. That's grants, right?
Yeah, this is one I had lost track of, but I know Grant put a lot of effort into it. It just happened to come up when I was out of office, I think, something like that. And I haven't had enough time to give it a thorough review. I don't know if Grant is on this. Oh, Grant, you're on this call. So I don't know if you have anything more to say about it.
No, I got a review from Sanjay, and he's been helping out a lot. But welcome anybody else to come and take a look at what we're talking about. I don't think this is perfect yet. I think I just kind of took a stab at what a possible solution would be, and we're kind of iterating over that right now. So I definitely welcome other ideas and different opinions.
Cool. Thank you for all the effort you're putting into this one. You pinged me. I'm sorry I missed this. Oh, it was 5 hours ago. I don't catch up with things until like it takes a while to get through my queue. All right, I'll take a look at this one tomorrow morning probably. And
Well, yeah.
Here, I'll just bookmark it to make sure I don't miss out on that. I'm sure I have a notification I haven't gotten to yet, but cool. Session persistence one is quite in depth. Appreciate all that effort.
Yep.
How much time do we got? 5 minutes. We're doing good. Exclude experimental guidance from standard channel CRDs.
This is one that came up in a review of, I forget. Oh, this was routability specifically. And for those not familiar, we have a series of awful hacks in our CRD generation code that allow us to do the experimental model we have today. And it looks for that gateway experimental tag and removes the field from standard CRDs. It's just a series of hacks, but it so far has worked for us. One of the things we're running into now is that we're adding more and more experimental guidance to the API spec itself. So for example, Gamma has a lot of API spec guidance that is really only specific to the experimental channel. We don't have a good way to exclude that from CRD, API spec, anything like that. This basically just is a reference to some code where that lives today. I know in Gateway API, most of the work that you can contribute to right now is API changes and docs and whatever. This is if someone just wants to hack away on good old fashioned code, this is an issue that is wide open for the taking and would be really nice to have pre-GA. Not strictly required, but would be really nice.
Cool. A series of hacks that do what we need right now sounds so much like the usual timid way of talking about your production code base. But do you want me to mark that one as on the road to GA and in V1, but we just won't call it a release blocker then?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it seems right.
Roger that. We got through our whole agenda. We got through triage. We have 3 minutes we can give everybody back, unless anybody has any like little announcements or anything they want to throw out there. We will adjourn. All right. Cheers, everybody. Have a great week. See you next week.